After two highly successful and critically acclaimed albums, Lupe Fiasco seemed to go on radio silence. For years, Lupe didn't have any studio releases until 2011 with Lasers, 4 years since his second album. To put it lightly, Lasers was a mixed bag, both from a fan standpoint and from a business standpoint. This is Retrospective of Lupe Fiasco's infamous third album, Lasers. To fully understand the growth and the release of this album, we have to start at the very beginning. And by the beginning, I mean immediately after The Cool. After The Cool, Lupe had planned to release a triple album called Lupend, in which he foreshadowed in the song Gotta Eat from The Cool. Lupe had a 5-album record deal with Atlantic Records, and Lupend was going to essentially be his final product, trying to fulfill that 5-album record deal. But to put it bluntly, Atlantic Records wasn't having that. So this would have been a breach of his contract. So the idea of Lupend was shelved, and Lupe began work on his third album. The next part of Lasers' troubled history starts in 2009, when the new track Shining Down was leaked. An unmastered, incomplete version of the song was leaked on the internet to mixed reception. One of the criticisms of this leaked track was that it sounded way too similar to Lupe's previous work on The Cool, which is understandable as the personnel for this track is literally the same from Superstar, with Matthew Santos on the chorus and soundtrack for the production. Personally, I love the song, and I was hungry for more Lupe music. This song is an example of an earlier concept of the Lupn album, with rumors stating that this song was intended to be a lead single for one of the triple albums. Shining Down did not make it to the standard release of Lasers, only being on the deluxe version of the album. The next single to release was I'm Beaming in 2010. This was another track that I felt was super solid and another one that I really like. Now this track was definitely a prelude to the overall style that we would see in Lasers. Emphasis on trap drum, lots of synthesizers, and a general more commercial sound for Lupe. Now don't get me wrong, Lupe has dabbled in more commercial sounding songs before with previous albums with songs like High Definition and Go Baby. So a commercial sounding song or two is not uncommon. This track definitely gives me vibes that Lupe is trying to overcome something and prove himself, which again I kind of feel like is a central idea of Lasers. I'm Beaming also has some nice wordplay, like with the lines, I got my energy from my energy. I be in outer space, but I got inner peace. Using like-sounding phrases and words, as well as the contrasting idea of outer and inner. Or the lines, well, you should protest. Yeah, you should picket me. I'm on a losing strike. I'm on a winning streak. Playing off the idea of protesters using picket signs and the clever idea of a losing strike, still paying off the idea of protesting. Now, maybe I'm looking too deep into these lines, but when Lupe says, I'm feeling really good, me and my different beat, me and my different drummer, he played the timpanis. See, that's what you got me here. You hearing me. I feel like this is his way of saying that Laser is going to be a different sound from him, with a different drummer signalizing different production partners, and maybe he's ensuring his fans that it's going to be okay because he became his fans because of his lyricism, not necessarily his beats. Another aspect of the song that I really like is how inspirational it is. The whole second verse of the song is some of my favorite from Lupe. It's not super deep or complex, but I just love the message it brings. It talks about his love and passion for both the hood and the nerd things, which has influenced him over the years. Lupe understands that he wouldn't be himself without both elements of his life and encourages the listener to adapt all those aspects in their life because that's what makes them unique. The song itself is called I'm Beaming, as if Lupe himself is a super bright figure, but this is contrasted with the line, they said my future was dark, which is in a reference to a song that we'll discuss later in the album and the title of the album, Beautiful Lasers. So after the release of I'm Beaming, Lupe revealed that Lasers had been in fact completed, but Atlantic was sitting on the album with no release date. Lupe said this in 2010, mind you, and it has been 3 years since his last project in 2007, and after 2 singles that were very far apart, fans were eagerly waiting for Lupe's next project. This got so bad that there was even a protest to Atlantic Records for them to release Lasers. After that controversy, Lupe met up with Atlantic Records, and the album finally got a release date for March 7th, 2011. I'm Beaming unfortunately received the same fate as Shining Down, losing its status as a single for the album and becoming a bonus track on the deluxe version of the album. The new single, which would become the album's new lead single, was The Show Goes On, and the song feels like a redemption arc for Lupe. The song is essentially a song about overcoming obstacles that you face, reminding you that despite everything, the show must go on. This song came out in a super prominent part of my life. I was in high school when this song came out, and I was also in the performing arts in a band program. This song spoke to me differently than Lupe's previous songs from Food and Liquor and The Cool. Lupe wasn't telling a story or being conscious about what's going on in society. Instead, this song was more about achieving your goals. No matter what, the show must go on. So what are you going to do to make sure that show is going to be good? Despite this, however, even this song has controversy behind it. The Show Goes On was a song that Atlantic Records was heavily pushing for, not Lupe. In an interview with Complex in 2011, Lupe had this to say about The Show Goes On. There's nothing really to tell about the record. To be honest, I didn't have nothing to do with that record. That was the label's record. That wasn't like I knew the producer or knew the writer or anything like that. This is one of those records that the company gave me. They even gave me stuff to rap about. Regardless, how Lupe feels about this song ended up being a massive hit for him and the album. The next lead single on the album was Words I Never Said, which I feel is the closest we got to Lupe's skater punk style that we saw in the first album in Food and Liquor. This song is an anti-authoritarian song featuring Skylar Grey, in which Lupe is rapping about a ton of controversial topics. Lupe runs the gambit of issues in the US, including funding for wars, education reform, bombing, his unapproval of then President Barack Obama, the American viewpoint of Muslim culture and religion, and socioeconomic inequalities. The song is angry and angsty. I really love the hook and the meaning behind it, how we bottle up emotions or are scared to speak up about things that we feel passionately about because they're controversial. This song is way different from anything leading up to the release of Lasers, but it still kind of fits Lupe's style as being this frustrated person living in America as a black Muslim from the hood, and all these feelings are on display here. So after some successful singles, a lot of brand recognition, and fan hype, Lasers was officially released on March 10th to a very mixed response. One reason for this is, outside of I'm Beamin' and Shining Down, is that all the producers on the album has not worked with Lupe in any of his previous albums. On top of that, after a 4-year-long wait, this album is significantly shorter than his previous 2 albums, clocking in at 57 minutes, while his past albums were at least 70 minutes each, and they were only a year apart. Some critics like the brighter sound that Lasers gave, the more inspirational lyrics, and the easier to listen to songs, while others felt that Lasers was a disappointment to what they expected from Lupe up to this point. This album is definitely the tale of 2 sounds, so let's look at what works and what doesn't work with Lasers. The first track of this album is Letting Go featuring Sarah Green. One of the central themes of Lasers seems to be trying to get out of a dark place mentally. Letting Go is a very emotional and hard-hitting track in which Lupe is rapping about how he's losing himself and straying further from his own perception of himself. He reflects back on his past with lines like, "My self-portrait shows a man that the wealth tortured, self-absorbed with his own self, forfeit a shelf full of awards, worshipping the warships that set sail on my sea of life. The way I see my own self and wonder if I still see a light. We were tight, seeing lights, speaking right and breathing life. Now all I see is my demons and barely even sleep at night." This song is one of the strongest songs we have lyrically for Lupe on this album. The lines are similar to what he has done in the past, with rhyming schemes with syllables extremely close together and having them flow effortlessly into each other. I like the line in particular, "Worshipping the warships that set sail on my sea of life," which has some beautiful alliteration, and then the follow-up line with, "The way I see my own self and wonder if I still see a light," in reference to this metaphorical ship straying so far away from the shore that he can no longer see the lighthouse. Therefore, him saying he can no longer see his former self. He continues with his internal struggle into the second verse with, "I'm begging you, don't let me go. We vow like the letter O, to never go our separate ways, to spin off into separate shows. Tired of all the wardrobe changing, playing all these extra roles, filled in with these different spirits, living off these separate souls." It appears that fame has really gotten to him as he's struggling to fulfill everything that everybody wants him to be, with him being stretched thin at the same time. But then the verse takes a really dark turn. "Point in life is getting hollow, can't wait for the exit hole. Give me room and entry wound, let me in or let me go." Now Lupe is straight up talking about suicide. Now Lasers isn't a concept album, but there are traces of a storyline coming together in certain parts. Letting Go touches on the feeling of losing yourself, seeing how you were once happy and how that feeling is slowly going away and that there's nothing you can do to get it back. It's the feeling of hopelessness and the struggle to get out of that mental state. Throughout the whole song, Lupe is rapping with a distorted sound and constant post-processed effects to amplify the feeling of anxiety with a constant droning piano loop that never ends, almost like Lupe is stuck in a rut himself. This song transitions perfectly into Words I Never Said, which keeps the edgy sound going and keeps the intensity very, very high. The next song after Words I Never Said is Till I Get There, which is my favorite song from the album. If Letting Go and Words I Never Said were the antithesis of pent-up stress and angst, then Till I Get There is the release. As far as the concept goes, Till I Get There is a duality of inspiration and being hopeful compared to the previous two tracks of dark mental spaces. So for the sake of comparison, let's put Till I Get There, The Show Goes On, and I'm Beaming as the light side of mental health aspect of the album. All these songs push forward the narrative of there will be better days and overcoming the problems and achieving goals. Till I Get There is Lupe's release on his issues dealing with fame, the record label, and problems of being a rapper. The song starts with no intro, with Lupe immediately jumping into the first verse. The first verse is his plea to give others and himself a second chance as he raps about getting pressure from both sides, from the record label and his fans. He raps about wanting to please his fans while at the same time being bombarded with boos and him fighting just to survive. And then the hook hits. I'ma keep it cool, I'ma do me. It is what it is, and that's how it's gonna be. Until I get there, till I get there. Yeah, I got flaws. I know I ain't perfect, but all ups and downs will soon be worth it when I get there. When I get there. It's such a simple hook, but like I'm Beaming, it just hits me so hard personally at the time. Even with his tone of voice, you feel the emotions in it. You ever had a crappy thing happen to you and you don't get mad or sad? You kind of just accept it and move on. That's kind of how this hook feels like. He's past the point of being angry. He's past the point of feeling bad for himself. Now he's accepted what life has given to him, and now he's looking towards the future. Note how the hook changes midway from Until I Get There to When I Get There, showing signs of hopefulness. This song isn't automatically about being in a better mental state. It's about the first steps to get to that better mental state. It takes time to get better mentally, and this song is a good example of taking that first step. The second verse is about mental health and more so the lack of it being an entertainer. He starts off by rapping about how he goes to a doctor because he feels like the fame isn't painless enough. But instead of helping him, he said he isn't famous enough and puts two change in his cup. The change that the doctor puts in his cup is a metaphor for changing up his sound, since the change will make his name ring much, much more and he'll be more famous. After that, he's prescribed a publicist, which he thinks is going to be a therapist, but instead gives him an interview and kicks him out. He then raps about being injured. Instead of him being able to recover, they shove him to a concert and force him to perform when he's definitely not in the right state to perform. This whole verse is him explaining that he needed help, either physically or mentally, but because of his fame and his role as an entertainer, his well-being wasn't important, but what was important was him performing and entertaining. The third verse is his turning point. He starts off the verse being hopeful and sort of wanting revenge on those who wronged him, and how he's basically going to show off. But as he's dreaming, he has this conversation with his younger version of himself, who tells him, "You're already here, just be yourself from here on up." This is Lupe coming to terms with himself. The things he's wanted in the past he's gotten. He feels like he's lost himself, but he really hasn't. He's been himself the entire time. The verse ends with this. Then he disappeared and I felt something familiar, something that I was taught, something that I had lost. If you are afraid of the fear that you're gonna change some, all you gotta do is remember where you came from. This kind of completes his journey established in Letting Go, in which he felt like he was distancing himself from his past life. And when in actuality, he didn't need to look back at his past. He needed to realize he's still the person that he always was, and that change comes from within, not from outside forces. So the first three tracks of this album are really solid. They all tackle different themes, but they all kind of tell a story of their own. You see a bit of a resolution and connective tissue. However, the momentum of this album stops dead at track number 4, I Don't Really Want to Care Right Now. This track feels like the most commercial song that Lupe has ever done. It's loud, full of synthesizers, it's super pop and club sounding, and it's extremely dated song. It's one of those songs that if you were to go back to the early 2010s, everything sounded just like this song. With staccato chord hits and the auto-tune hook that MDMA does, the repetitive stingy bass line and this heavy bass, just nothing of this sounds like Lupe to me. When people have criticisms about this album, it's because of tracks like this. It sounds like Lupe tries to have fun with it, and he gets into it, but this track does nothing for me. Worst off, this track and the next track, Out of My Head, were singles for the album as well. So Out of My Head is another very commercial sounding song for Lupe. This song features Trey Songz, who does the hook, and he does a fine job on it. The song itself feels like another excuse to have Lupe on the radio. I remember the song being played all the time on Hot 105, which was an adult contemporary R&B radio station down here in South Florida. I Don't Want to Care Right Now feels like it was made for clubs, while Out of My Head feels like it was made for R&B and grown folk radio. I can at the very least tolerate Out of My Head, but like the previous track, is not tracks that I think of when I think of Lupe. Falling Out of My Head is The Show Goes On, and then the track Beautiful Lasers, Two Ways. Thematically, I feel like Beautiful Lasers is the prequel song to Letting Go, as they both focus on the topic of suicide. In Beautiful Lasers, there's no holding back. Lupe is very upfront about his feelings. We see this in lines like, "Can't understand what I'm saying, can't figure out what I'm implying. If you feel like you don't want to be alive, you feel just how I am." Or, "Everything down here sucks. Maybe what's up there is great. We all gotta go one day. I just want to cut to the chase." There's no extended metaphors here or really any clever wordplay. It's just raw emotions. The song, once again, is a product of the internal struggle Lupe has with stardom and the record label and the pressures of life. And that's partly why there's an underlying theme in Lasers. This album, in a way, is tackling mental health and different emotional responses to it. Maybe you feel angry and defeated, like in Beautiful Lasers. Maybe you feel acceptance and look for better days, like Until I Get There. Maybe you lash out, like in Words I Never Said. And maybe you have that redemption arc, like The Show Goes On. There's a lot of emotions and mental states that can be filtered from just this album. During an interview with the Chicago Tribune, Lupe had this to say about the song. "It's about me contemplating suicide, coming in grips with it. I was reading about Hunter S. Thompson and why he committed suicide, the Kurt Cobains, the people in the same business as I am who actually carried it out. You have the corporation in your ear and you're living in a public life, but you also have a private life and thinking, I don't want to be here." And it also refers to social suicide, where I would just leave, not just do music anymore. I came out of it literally not caring about any of it. It was a constant set of demands. If you don't do this interview, you won't get coverage in this magazine. If you don't do this song, this album isn't happening. Saying that I didn't care became my therapy, my recovery. And I felt like I needed to document it. I felt like if I'm going to go through that and I'm a normal person, I felt like other people must be contemplating this too because of similar pressures to do things they felt they were wrong or against their better judgment. You can criticize this album as much as you want. You had the right to do so. However, what Lasers did and that his previous albums didn't do, and I'd argue that his other albums afterwards didn't do as well, was give a very personal and emotional Lupe. Yes, the complexity of the album isn't there from The Cool or Food and Liquor, but many aspects of those albums, he was telling a story or rapping from the perspective of characters or representations of people. But Lasers gives us a truly impactful look at Lupe's mental state at the time. Now, I do want to note that the song does have a very edgy sound to it, harsh synths and auto-tune hooks and an overall indie rock sound and distortion, which helps with this angry sound that the song is pushing for. However, the live recording of the song I feel is way more emotionally effective. The live version of the song was performed before the album's release and it was much more mellow, contemplative and soft. There isn't these extreme peaks of volume. There wasn't any yelling or beat drops. It felt more like a release or a true musical outlet for his feelings. I wish this version was the style that they went with on the album rather than the studio recording that we got. Following Beautiful Lasers comes a few very mediocre tracks. Coming Up is a decent feel-good, upbeat track, and the song is basically about Lupe being on the road and missing his loved ones. And while the production is nice, it's probably my most favorite track with MDA on it, but it's just kind of okay. After that is State Run Radio and Break the Chain, both which I feel fall very short. State Run Radio is an anti-authority song about censorship and finding real music or real artists to be played on popular media or radio, or how the powers that be suppress these voices from being heard to push and to forward push their agenda. Again, this song is only okay, and it doesn't hit hard the same way something like Words I Never Said or the instrumental or Streets on Fire. Break the Chain sounds like an extremely generic pop EDM light song, which was very popular at the time. The song is mostly forgettable, and Lupe's first verse is fine, but Sway's verse and Lupe's second verse is just really not that good in my opinion. And while we were talking about mediocre tracks, I'll place Never Forget You in that same category. It's essentially a song about missed ones, past relationships, and remembering good times. Lupe sounds very somber and not fully into it in this song. John Legend does a decent job on the chorus, but neither artist seems fully interested in performing the song. The last track I like to talk about is one of my favorites on the album, All Black Everything. Lupe the Storyteller is back for this track, with Lupe imagining a world that's all black, in which Africans were never stolen from Africa and enslaved. He portrays a world in which black excellence reigns and damages of America's racist practices never happened. In this song, it also has some role reversals, with ideas like Fox News being the news source for the Middle East or black people creating the Constitution. I really like this track. It feels the most like classic Lupe, and it's a very uplifting, inspirational track. This track actually should have ended the album instead of the disinterested Never Forget You. So is Lasers a bad album? No. But at the same time, it still sticks out as Lupe's weakest album in his studio run. There's some really strong points of this album, like Lupe's personal moments in Letting Go and Beautiful Lasers Until I Get There. There's some instances of a classic Lupe style with songs like All Black Everything, I'm Beaming, and Shining Down. But at the same time, the lows of this album sticks out so much more. There are so many skippable and mediocre tracks that overall hurts the album when this album is so short, so each weak track sticks out that much more. But at the same time, the lows of this album sticks out so much more. There's so many mediocre or skippable tracks, and that hurts the overall product since the album is so short. So each weak track, hurts the albums that much more. The problem behind the scenes that led to this album's release cannot be overstated. Having the context of how this album came to be, you can give the album the benefit of the doubt. But that doesn't change the end product and how much of a disappointment it was to Lupe's fans. Despite this, the album did well commercially, sold a little under the Cool, but it tops more #1 spots on billboards than the Cool and Food Liquor had, and had a higher charts than any of those previous albums. Lasers no doubt brought in a whole lot of new Lupe fans, and part of that was because of the new style and the new direction for Lupe. My favorite tracks are as follows: Letting Go, Till I Get There, The Show Goes On, All Black Everything, and I'm Beaming. Thank you for watching. My name is Brian, and this has been Sound Test.